My life just hummed along. Not perfectly happy, perhaps, but it was mine, and it felt stable. I'd settled into this comfortable routine with my husband, a sense of security wrapped around me, a trust in the long-term rhythm of our life together. It was just another Tuesday, an utterly mundane afternoon, the kind you never remember until something completely shatters it. I was probably just sipping my tea, maybe even humming along to a song on the radio, completely oblivious to the earthquake that was about to hit. It's funny, isn't it, how one moment can change everything. One minute you're feeling safe, grounded in your own home, and the next, the very ground beneath your feet just vanishes. I had no idea that the calm before this storm was so incredibly, profoundly calm. My world felt predictable, a cozy blanket, and I had absolutely no inkling that it was about to be ripped right off me, leaving me exposed and freezing. Then, my phone buzzed. Just a little vibration, nothing ominous, certainly nothing to prepare me for the icy words that would appear on the screen. I picked it up, probably with a smile, expecting a grocery list or a joke. But then I saw it, stark and cold. Get your things and leave. I have a new girlfriend. It hit me like a physical blow, a punch right to the chest that stole my breath. I felt the air leave my lungs, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. Shock, disbelief, a profound, searing betrayal. My mind just couldn't process it. I read the words again, and then again, willing them to change, to be a prank, anything but the brutal truth they presented. But they stayed there, unblinking, mocking. It was so impersonal, so dismissive. My husband, the man I'd built a life with, had just discarded me with a text message. The humiliation was immediate, a hot flush spreading across my face. I tried to call him, of course. My fingers fumbled, desperate for answers, for any explanation that wasn't this cruel. But he didn't answer. Or maybe he did, and his voice was so cold, so dismissive, that it was worse than silence. The reality of it slammed into me then. I was being thrown out, summarily dismissed from my own home, from my own life. I grabbed a bag, my hands shaking so badly I could barely pack essentials. It was a blur of motion, fueled by pure adrenaline and a rising tide of tears. That first night away, it was a desolate, empty space. I felt utterly lost, adrift, humiliated. Every shadow seemed to mock me. Every silence echoed the emptiness in my chest. The familiar comfort of my bed was replaced by an alien mattress, and the scent of my home, my life, was gone. I just lay there, staring into the dark, feeling the crushing weight of everything I had just lost. But even then, deep down, a tiny spark of something else, something determined, began to flicker. Finding a temporary refuge was like grasping at a lifeline in a turbulent sea. I landed softly, thank goodness, perhaps on a friend's couch, or maybe in a tiny rented room that felt utterly impersonal, yet offered a much-needed haven. Those first few days were a blur of raw grief, a constant ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe, hard to think. I cried until I felt hollowed out, the confusion a heavy fog that kept me from seeing anything clearly. The sheer shock of it all, the brutal suddenness, was a physical weight I carried everywhere. But then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift. The tears didn't come as easily. The confusion started to lift, replaced by a simmering, quiet anger. It wasn't a loud, explosive rage, not yet, but a cold, steady heat beneath my skin. I started replaying that text, those dismissive words, the absolute disrespect of it all. Who does that? Who tosses aside years of shared life with a mere flick of their thumb? It wasn't just the words, it was the entire package. The immediate demand to leave, as if I was nothing more than an inconvenient piece of furniture. And the public admission, the casual way he announced a new girlfriend, as if my feelings, my very existence, simply didn't matter. That's when the true nature of his cruelty, his utter lack of empathy, really solidified in my mind. The shock was finally wearing off, leaving behind a hard, crystalline resolve that began to form, like ice, in the very core of my being. I stopped crying. Instead, I started thinking. My mind, which had been so clouded by pain, suddenly felt sharp, focused. It was as if every tear I'd shed had washed away the illusion, leaving me with a clear, almost surgical view of the situation. I realized that my pain, this immense sorrow, could be channeled into something else entirely. It could be transformed into a strategic fuel, a quiet, potent desire for something more than just survival. I began to meticulously gather information, almost without realizing I was doing it at first. Little details about his finances, his predictable routines, those subtle vulnerabilities he always thought no one noticed. I even started to look into this new girlfriend, trying to piece together the narrative from his side, understanding the landscape of betrayal. This wasn't about being a heartbroken victim anymore. It was about understanding the battlefield. It felt less like grief and more like preparation. I took the first practical steps, securing important documents, cutting off legal access to joint accounts. Each small action felt like a quiet victory, a subtle regaining of control. These weren't grand gestures, just quiet, calculated moves, like a chess player setting up the opening pieces. I was laying the groundwork, brick by brick, for something much bigger, something that would shift the balance in my favor. And in doing so, I was preparing myself for the intricate dance that was about to unfold. My revenge, if you can even call it that, began to unfold with a chilling precision I didn't even know I possessed. It wasn't about screaming or grand gestures. It was about something far more subtle, a deceptive calm that masked the turmoil still churning inside me. I was careful, meticulously so, to make every action appear accidental, an unfortunate coincidence, or simply the natural consequences of his own carelessness. The last thing I wanted was for him to suspect me. I learned that the most effective sabotage isn't loud, it's a whisper. It was like an art form, really, an intricate dance where every step had to be perfectly timed, perfectly placed. I focused on what I knew he valued most, what truly mattered to him: his finances, his carefully curated professional reputation, his social standing, and yes, even that brand new relationship. These weren't random acts. They were targeted, specific, designed to gently, almost imperceptibly, chip away at his world. I wanted him to feel the slow burn, not a sudden explosion. One of the first things I did was subtly expose his unprofessional behavior to a few key clients. Nothing overt, just a quiet, almost casual mention of a past oversight, a gentle question that planted a seed of doubt. The kind of thing that would lead to lost contracts, but make it look like his own fault, his own slipping standards. I also became quite adept at orchestrating leaks of embarrassing personal details to his social circle. Again, nothing I could be traced to, just enough to fuel whispers and speculation. Then there were the financial records. Oh, the fun I had there, meticulously manipulating things within legal bounds to create tax headaches that would confound even his accountant. It wasn't about stealing. It was about creating a labyrinth of confusion and penalties that would gradually eat away at his sense of control. Each move was like pulling a thread from a tapestry, watching it slowly unravel, knowing he wouldn't even notice until it was too late. And his new girlfriend? Well, let's just say a few well-placed, entirely truthful but unflattering insights about his character found their way to her. Nothing overtly malicious from me, just honest observations that might sow tiny seeds of doubt in her mind. I wanted her to see the real him, the one I had unfortunately come to know so well, but through her own perception, not through my direct influence. After all, if he could discard me so easily, what would stop him from doing the same to her? Throughout all of this, I maintained the perfect outward appearance, a sad, but bravely moving on ex-wife. I offered sympathetic nods to mutual friends, perhaps a quiet sigh about the difficulties of divorce. He had no idea, not a clue, that I was the quiet architect behind his growing misfortunes. He was just starting to feel the subtle tremors, but he had no idea they were part of a perfectly orchestrated earthquake. At first, he was oblivious, of course. That's always the way, isn't it, when you're so wrapped up in your own world, your own perceived infallibility? He probably just saw isolated incidents, a lost client here, a minor financial hiccup there, but slowly, inevitably, the cumulative effects of my, shall we call them adjustments, began to pile up. His life, which had been so perfectly ordered, so meticulously controlled, started to unravel in ways he couldn't explain. I could almost picture him scratching his head, trying to make sense of the new cracks appearing in his carefully constructed facade. Business deals that seemed like sure things suddenly fell through, leaving him bewildered and scrambling. His impeccable professional reputation, something he guarded so fiercely, began to suffer from whispers and strange rumors he couldn't quite trace. Even his new relationship, the one he'd so readily discarded me for, seemed to be experiencing unexplained strains. His personal finances became a tangled mess, a labyrinth of minor but persistent complications. It must have been infuriating for him, used as he was to effortless success. I imagined his growing frustration, the slow burn of confusion turning into a simmering paranoia. He'd be looking for enemies, blaming bad luck, pointing fingers at external forces. The thought that I could be behind it all, his meek, discarded ex-wife, would have been utterly beyond his comprehension. His composure, which he always prided himself on, started to crack around the edges. I could sense his growing agitation, even from a distance, like a faint tremor before an earthquake. The man who thought he had everything under control was slowly, steadily losing his grip. He even tried to confront me. Oh, he did. Either directly, with that bluster he always used when he was cornered, or through mutual friends, demanding to know if I had anything to do with his sudden string of misfortunes. But I was ready. I maintained my perfectly innocent facade, eyes wide with feigned sympathy, subtly hinting that perhaps his own past actions were finally catching up to him. I'd just offer a gentle sigh or a wistful comment about how karma works in mysterious ways. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, knowing exactly when the impact would hit. Each deflection from me, each innocent denial, only served to deepen his suspicion while simultaneously making him doubt his own sanity. He was trapped in a web of his own making, only now the threads were being pulled by someone else entirely. The pressure mounted, his face growing tighter, his temper shorter. He was looking for a villain, never suspecting the quiet woman he'd so carelessly tossed aside. And then I knew the moment it clicked. That chilling certainty that must have washed over him like a cold wave. I was behind it. He finally connected the dots, but by then, he was already deep in the trap I had so patiently, so meticulously set for him. The walls were closing in, and there was no escape. He was beginning to understand that the consequence of his actions wasn't just my pain, but the complete unraveling of his entire world. The real show was just about to begin. The downfall, when it finally arrived, was significant. I saw it unfold from a distance, like watching a slow-motion film of a building collapsing. It wasn't a sudden crash, but a series of escalating tremors that led to a professional scandal, severe financial repercussions, and the complete implosion of his new relationship and social standing. He lost so much, not in one dramatic moment, but in a gradual erosion of everything he valued. And as I watched, a complex mix of emotions washed over me. There was satisfaction, yes, a deep, quiet sense of vindication that settled in my bones. But it wasn't the wild triumph I might have imagined. It was mixed with a profound sense of closure, like finally turning the last page of a difficult, painful book. And beneath it all, a weariness, an emotional fatigue from the journey I'd been on. Revenge isn't easy work, and carrying that burden, even in secret, takes its toll. It wasn't just about his demise. It was about my reemergence. Having achieved what I set out to do, having seen the fruits of my painful labor, I felt a distinct shift within myself. The need for retribution, the anger that had fueled me, began to dissipate. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted, allowing me to finally breathe freely again. I realized that clinging to that anger would only keep me tethered to him, to the past, and I was ready to truly let go. I started focusing on rebuilding my life, not in reaction to his, but for myself. I was stronger, undeniably wiser, and fiercely independent. The woman who had packed a small bag in a daze of humiliation was gone. In her place was someone who understood her own resilience, who had faced betrayal and found a deep well of inner strength. That painful journey had stripped away so much, but it had also revealed what truly mattered. I began pursuing passions I'd neglected for years, rediscovering parts of myself that had been dormant. It wasn't about finding a new relationship or seeking external validation. It was about rediscovering my own worth, from the inside out. I learned that true empowerment isn't about getting even. It's about moving forward, unburdened by the past, forging healthier connections with myself and the world around me. My ending isn't a fairy tale with a prince. It's something far more profound, a story of self-reclamation. It's about finding purpose, nurturing joy, and standing tall on my own 2 feet, completely removed from the shadow of betrayal. The text that shattered my world ultimately became the catalyst for building a new, more authentic one, and that, I've come to realize, is the greatest triumph of all.
And shared memories. The kitchen filled with the scent of roasting turkey, pumpkin pies, and the unmistakable hum of the dinner table set up for everyone. It was a tradition we never missed, no matter how busy life got. But this year was different. It was the one time of the year that I could count on my family to be together. So when I heard those words, "Thanksgiving is canceled, we can't afford it," something inside me snapped. My dad, the person who always acted like the pillar of strength, the one who kept everything together, was now telling me we couldn't even afford to celebrate a holiday? My mind raced with disbelief. What do you mean you can't afford it? You're telling me we're canceling Thanksgiving? I asked, my voice rising despite myself. He looked at me with the same tired expression I'd seen countless times before. "We're going through tough times, honey. Things are tight. You understand, right?" His voice was calm, too calm for the situation. It didn't make sense. This was the same man who never failed to go all out for Thanksgiving dinner, no matter how many bills were stacked up in the corner. We'd all been there. The late nights, the stress, but he never let it show. Or so I thought. My brother sat there, avoiding eye contact, as if he knew what was coming. Mom? She was in the living room, already half distracted by her phone, not even fully paying attention to what was happening. This was becoming a pattern. My family had always depended on me, always expected me to be the one to fix things, to make sure everyone was happy, that everything was in place. But today it felt different. I stared at my dad, feeling my stomach twist into knots. "You're seriously telling me that Thanksgiving is off, just like that?" I repeated, trying to make sense of it. The pain in my chest was growing. We didn't need anything extravagant this year, but the idea of not even coming together for dinner, not even spending time as a family, was that really happening? "Look, I said I'm sorry," he muttered, then added quickly, "but we just don't have the money for it, okay?" His words stung, but I could hear the familiar frustration in his tone, as if it were my fault he had to make this decision. I could barely contain my anger now. "Funny, since you're all having dinner without me, apparently," I snapped back before I could stop myself. The words left my mouth before I even had time to think them through. But once I said it, I couldn't take them back. My dad froze. The words hit him like a punch. I could see the familiar guilt rising in his eyes, the shame. He looked away for a second, and I knew he wasn't prepared for this confrontation. He had always been the one in control, the one making the decisions. But this was different. I could feel the air grow heavy with tension. For the first time in years, I wasn't going to just sit back and take it. I was angry, but more than that, I was hurt. After all the sacrifices I'd made for them, for the family, for their happiness, this was how they repaid me? This was how they showed me appreciation? The realization hit me like a wave. This wasn't about dinner. It wasn't about Thanksgiving. It was about everything that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. And then it hit me, the truth I'd been avoiding. They'd always expected me to handle things, to be the glue holding everything together while they coasted along. They'd never had to face the consequences of their own actions. And I was always there to clean up the mess. But now, I couldn't be that person anymore. Fine, I said, my voice cold. If you can't afford Thanksgiving, then I guess I'll make sure you won't need to worry about anything else. My heart was racing as I walked away, but I knew in that moment I was done. This wasn't about the holiday anymore. This was about respect, about boundaries, about me finally standing up for myself. I had spent years being the family fixer, the one who always showed up when things went wrong, the one who would drop everything, no matter what, to make sure everyone else was taken care of. But now, standing in the quiet of my living room, the weight of it all began to settle on me in a way it never had before. I had given them so much, my time, my energy, my patience. Yet, when it came down to it, I was nothing more than an afterthought. It wasn't the first time I had felt this way. For as long as I could remember, I had been the one to step in when the family needed saving. Whether it was stepping in to help pay bills, babysitting for hours, or simply organizing the family gatherings that no one else seemed to care about, I had always been the glue holding it all together. But in hindsight, that was the problem. I had let them lean on me, and they had taken it for granted. They had come to expect that I would always be there, no matter how little they acknowledged my sacrifices. Flashbacks rushed into my mind, vivid as if they had just happened yesterday. I remembered last year's Thanksgiving dinner when my mother had casually asked me to pick up the turkey on the way over, even though I had just finished an exhausting work week. No one bothered to ask if I needed help. No one asked how I was doing. I was just the one who made everything work. The same thing happened every single year, holidays, birthdays, anniversaries. It didn't matter what I was going through. I was always expected to prioritize their needs over my own. And every time I spoke up, every time I suggested I needed a break or simply wanted to enjoy the holidays without the pressure of being the fixer, they would guilt-trip me. I thought back to the last Christmas when my sister had shown up with her new boyfriend and expected me to drop everything to entertain them, even though I had promised myself that I would take the day off to relax. But of course, that never happened. Instead, I ended up cooking the entire meal, cleaning up afterward, and making sure everyone had a good time. I didn't mind helping, but when it was always me doing the work, while others waltzed in without lifting a finger, it felt like something was breaking inside me. Then, this Thanksgiving, to hear my dad so casually announce that it was canceled, and that they couldn't afford it, while I was excluded from the dinner plans, was the final straw. I had been excluded from so many things in the past, but this time it was different. This time it wasn't about finances or the holidays themselves. It was about the fact that they hadn't even considered including me. It wasn't that they needed money or help with the dinner. They didn't even care enough to ask. I wasn't part of their plans. It wasn't even a question. It was just assumed that I wouldn't be there. And for the first time in a long time, I realized just how deep the betrayal ran. All these years, I had been bending over backward to make sure everything was perfect for them. And yet, I was still treated like an outsider in my own family. They didn't see how much I had sacrificed, how much I had put aside for their sake. My needs, my feelings, none of that had ever mattered. I had been expected to quietly endure, always putting them first, never daring to ask for anything in return. As I sat there, the weight of the decision I had made began to sink in. I had cut them off, really cut them off. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty about it. I realized that I was done being the family fixer. I was done being the one who held everything together while they carried on as if nothing was wrong. It was time for me to prioritize myself for once. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt a deep sense of loss, a sense of finality. Thanksgiving wasn't just about the meal. It was about the family coming together. It was about love, tradition, and connection. But now it felt like that connection had been ripped away from me. Not by choice, but by neglect, by manipulation. And as I closed my eyes, the weight of it all crushed me. The moment everything shattered happened in an instant. I could feel my pulse racing as I stood in front of them. All of them, Mom, Dad, and Wendy. The tension in the room was thick, almost suffocating. The lies they had told, the guilt they had piled on, it all came rushing back in a flash. I had been holding it together for so long, pretending to play my part, but not anymore. "Funny, since you're all having dinner without me," I blurted out, my voice sharp, dripping with sarcasm. The words slipped out faster than I could stop them, but they were exactly what I needed to say. Their faces froze for a moment, but I could see it. The guilt, the discomfort, they all felt it. But it wasn't enough. The moment of truth was here, and yet they didn't even flinch. Mom's expression softened, her eyes pleading, as if she was going to say something to smooth it over. But Wendy didn't even try to hide the anger. "You're being dramatic," she snapped, her voice laced with frustration. "It's just dinner, Stephen. You're acting like this is the end of the world. You're blowing things out of proportion." I stood there, feeling the sting of her words, but they didn't faze me anymore. For the first time, I didn't care about her excuses or Dad's silence. "You think I'm being dramatic?" I shot back, my heart pounding in my chest. "You all lied to me, guilt-tripped me, and then when I finally have the courage to stand up for myself, I'm the one who's dramatic?" The words were out before I could stop them, but they were long overdue. Mom sighed, her voice shaking as she spoke. "You know we didn't mean to hurt you, Stephen, but this is just how it is. We've always done things like this." It wasn't a new excuse. It was the same tired, overused justification that had kept me in line for years. But not anymore. Not this time. "No," I said firmly, my voice steady and sure. "It's not just how it is. It's how you've made it. And I'm done. I'm done being the backup. Done being your safety net when it's convenient for you. I'm not doing this anymore." The room fell silent. My words lingered, hanging in the air like an unspoken challenge. There was no going back from this moment. The realization hit me like a cold slap. I wasn't just confronting them. I was finally confronting myself, my own fears of standing up for who I truly was. And in that silence, I knew this was the breaking point. No more compromises. No more putting myself last for a family that only showed up when it was convenient. I didn't waste any time. The moment the words left my lips, the weight that had been crushing me for years lifted, just for a moment. But it was enough. I walked straight to my desk, opened my laptop, and made the call. The car I had been planning to buy for them, the one I had saved for, the one I'd hoped would make everything right, was now off the table. I'd spent months thinking about it, the car symbolizing everything I had sacrificed for them over the years. It was supposed to be a grand gesture, a way to show them I still cared, to prove I was still their son, the one who always showed up, always put others first. But it wasn't a gift anymore. It was a weight, an expectation that I didn't want to bear any longer. I clicked cancel on the transaction. I felt the flood of relief rush through me, but along with it came a sharp pang of guilt. This was going to hurt them. I knew it. They were going to react, maybe even beg me to reconsider. But I had already made my decision. This wasn't just about the car, it was about everything. The years of bending over backward for them, of letting my own needs and desires take a back seat to theirs. I had been living my life in the shadows of their expectations, carrying their burden while they sat back and expected me to always be there. No more. This wasn't about punishing them. It was about me finally standing up for myself. I wasn't a doormat, a backup plan that they could call on when they needed something, and then discard when it wasn't convenient. This decision wasn't about the car. It was about reclaiming my life. The moment I hit send on the cancellation, I felt like I had finally taken back a piece of myself that I had given away over the years. A piece I hadn't even realized was gone until it was returned to me. I wasn't going to be controlled by their guilt trips, their expectations, and their endless demands anymore. The ripple effect didn't take long to hit. Less than an hour later, my phone buzzed. The texts flooded in. First, Mom, "What are you doing, Stephen? The car was supposed to be a family gift. You can't just cancel it like that." Then Dad, with his usual quiet yet powerful words, "You're breaking your mother's heart, son." But the one that really hit was Wendy's. "What the hell is wrong with you? You can't just do this. You're being selfish. We've always been there for you." I sat there, staring at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. It was so tempting to cave in, to respond with an apology and somehow make it all better. But no, I couldn't. I had made my choice and I wasn't going back. I took a deep breath and put the phone down. A strange feeling settled over me. Relief. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was on the edge of a breakdown. Instead, I felt free, empowered. But there was also guilt. It hit me in waves, like a constant undertow, trying to drag me back into their world of manipulation. I wondered if I had done the right thing. Would they understand eventually? Would they even care that I was trying to fix myself? Or was I just some failure in their eyes? The guilt was there, but it didn't have the power it once did. It was nothing compared to the relief of knowing I had taken control of my own life, for the first time in ages. The first wave hit me fast, like a storm crashing over a calm sea. My phone buzzed constantly, the screen flashing with name after name. I knew what was coming. My mom, dad, and even Wendy, all trying to get in touch. I let the calls ring out for a while, not wanting to face it just yet. But the guilt weighed on me, and finally I picked up. "Stephen, what are you doing?" It was Mom, her voice shaky, laced with the kind of sadness that always made me second-guess myself. "You can't just cancel the car like that. We need it. We need you." Her words twisted in my chest. It was the same script, the same plea. I had heard it so many times before. But this time I wasn't giving in. I wasn't backing down. "Mom, I'm done," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been giving, and you've never cared about what I need. It's over." I could hear her gasp on the other end. "Don't say that. Please, you're making a mistake. Think about how much we've done for you. How much we've supported you." She paused, her voice cracking. "We're family. We love you." The guilt trip had begun, but I was prepared. I had heard it all before, the guilt-laden emotional appeals meant to reel me back in. It was their final card, the one they always played when things were about to fall apart. "Mom, I've thought about it. I've thought about everything, and this isn't just about the car. It's about how you've treated me all these years. I'm done being the one who sacrifices while you all take without ever giving anything back." The phone was quiet for a moment, and then I heard her voice again, softer this time, more pleading. "You're making a mistake, Stephen. Please don't cut us off. We're your family. You don't understand how much you're hurting us." I shut my eyes, fighting the pull of that familiar guilt, the one that always made me second-guess myself. But I stood firm. "I understand more than you think. I'm not your punching bag anymore. This is what's best for me. I'm sorry." I hung up before she could respond. But it wasn't just Mom. Within minutes, Dad called, then Wendy, each of them with the same script. "Don't be like this, Stephen. We need you," Dad said, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of desperation. "And Wendy, you're being selfish. We've always been there for you, and now you're just abandoning us." The words stung, even though I knew they were manipulative. They were trying to make me feel bad. They wanted me to bend, to apologize, to go back to the way things were. But I knew I couldn't. Yet, as I sat there, staring at my phone, a nagging feeling crept in. Was I being too harsh? Could I have handled this better? What if this was too extreme? What if I was pushing them away for good? The thought made my chest tighten. I began to doubt myself, wondering if maybe I could have been more patient, maybe tried to work things out without pulling away so drastically. The guilt crept in again, quiet and insistent, telling me I might have overreacted. But then I remembered the years of sacrifice, the constant disappointment, and the never-ending manipulation. I couldn't keep living that way. They had to understand that. This was about standing up for myself, even if it meant sacrificing the comfort of the familiar guilt trips. Still, the question lingered. Had I done the right thing? Would this really make them understand, or would I just be alone in the end? I didn't know the answer yet, but I had made my choice and I wasn't turning back. The calls kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. I let them ring out, giving myself time to breathe before answering. But eventually I couldn't avoid it anymore. This time it was Dad. "Stephen, son, please," his voice cracked through the phone, so raw and full of emotion that for a split second I almost wavered. "You're making a mistake. We really need you here. Your mother, she's worried. And with my health problems, I don't know how much longer I can manage without you." I knew what he was doing. He'd used his health before, like a weapon, to make me feel guilty. But hearing it again, hearing the familiar tone of desperation, brought the old feelings rushing back. It was like I could see all the times I'd dropped everything to rush over, the countless hours I'd spent trying to keep everything together for them. The thought of him in pain, of Mom being worried, pulled at me. It was all too familiar. I took a deep breath before speaking, trying to keep my voice steady. Dad, I'm sorry, but this isn't about your health. It's about how you and Mom have treated me my whole life. I've always been there for you, but it's never been enough. And now you want me to keep sacrificing for you? I can't do that anymore. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then Dad's voice became softer, almost pleading. Son, please, I'm not asking for much. Just come home. For us. I don't know what I'll do if I lose you. Don't leave us like this. I felt a pang in my chest. It hit me harder than I expected. The weight of everything, the guilt, the love, the hurt, felt like it was closing in on me. But I couldn't go back. Not now. Not after everything I'd been through. I had to keep standing my ground. I can't, Dad. I just can't. Before he could respond, I ended the call. I didn't want to hear any more of the same empty promises. I knew the game by now. It was always the same. I would give, they would take, and nothing would change. But the calls didn't stop. They were relentless. The next few days were a blur of messages and voicemails, all begging me to come back, to fix things, to put everything behind us and move on like we always had. Wendy called too, with her usual mix of guilt and charm. You can't just walk away from family like this, she said, sounding like she was on the verge of tears. We've always been there for you. Don't you remember everything we've done together? You owe us this. It was the same line, the same manipulation. But now it didn't faze me. Wendy, I've done enough, I told her, my voice firm. I've given, and I've been treated like a doormat. You want me to come back, but nothing will change. I'm not doing this anymore. Not unless things change. The desperation in her voice was palpable. Please, Stephen. We're family. We need you. Your dad needs you. We'll fix everything. We promise. Just come home. It wasn't the first time I'd heard those promises, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. But the promises were empty. I could see right through them. They were just words, meant to manipulate me into returning to my old role. The fixer, the one who always cleaned up the mess. But I wasn't that person anymore. Not for them. Not for anyone. I blocked their numbers after that. I knew it was harsh, but I couldn't keep getting sucked back into their web. I had to protect myself. The calls stopped coming, but the guilt lingered. The quiet moments when I'd question whether I was being too harsh, whether I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew I had made the right decision. The family had to learn to stand on their own for once. The moment I ended the call with Wendy, something inside me shifted. It was as though a heavy burden that I didn't even realize I was carrying had finally been lifted from my shoulders. In the past, I would have panicked. I would have agonized over every word, every action. I would have second-guessed myself until I couldn't breathe. But this time, I didn't feel the usual guilt creeping in. I didn't feel the tug of obligation, the nagging sense that I was somehow betraying my family. I had always thought that family was everything, that loyalty and sacrifice were the ultimate signs of love. I had believed for so long that my role in the family was to be the fixer, the one who picked up the pieces, who dealt with the mess, who bore the weight of everyone else's problems. But as I stood there, alone in my apartment, I realized that I had been a martyr to a system that took and took without ever giving anything back. This wasn't just about the car, or the holidays, or even the years of feeling like I was the only one who cared. It was about something much deeper. It was about my self-worth. I had spent so many years putting everyone else's needs first that I had forgotten about myself. My life had been nothing but a string of sacrifices, all for people who only saw me as a tool to make their lives easier. But now, for the first time, I felt empowered. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't scared to stand up for myself. In fact, it felt liberating. For once, I wasn't the one caving under pressure. I wasn't the one cleaning up after everyone. I was reclaiming my own life, my own happiness. The satisfaction of standing up for myself was something I had never experienced before. It was bittersweet, of course. I couldn't deny that a part of me still longed for the family I had tried so hard to hold together. There were moments, fleeting, painful moments, when I wished things had turned out differently. But those moments were getting fewer and fewer. The more I let go, the more I saw the freedom in it. Family doesn't always mean blood. It doesn't always mean that you have to endure everything, sacrifice everything, for people who are willing to discard you when it's convenient for them. The love I had been giving, the loyalty I had been offering was a one-way street. I had allowed myself to be used for so long that I had lost sight of what healthy love and boundaries looked like. I had learned that the most loving thing I could do for myself and for them was to let go. It wasn't easy and it didn't feel good at first, but it was the right thing, and that was something I needed to come to terms with. In the days that followed, I began to reflect on the journey I had been on. I wasn't the person I had been a few months ago, the anxious, guilt-ridden man who had believed he had to keep fixing everything. I was stronger now. I had drawn a line in the sand, and I had stood firm on it. I wasn't the family doormat anymore. I was someone who could prioritize themselves, and that was the most important transformation of all. As the weeks passed, the calls kept coming. The voicemails piled up, each one filled with varying degrees of desperation, guilt, and frustration. At first, I felt a twinge of something, regret perhaps or fear. But then each time I listened to their voices, I realized something that had been staring me in the face all along. They weren't just trying to make things right. They were trying to manipulate me to get me back into the role I had so willingly played for all those years. I stayed firm. I ignored their messages. I didn't return the calls. For the first time in my life, I had taken control. I had said no, and that no had become my shield. There was no turning back now. My decision had been made, and there was no reason to question it. As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. It wasn't immediate, of course. At first, it was a strange, unfamiliar kind of calm, like stepping into a new world where I was no longer bound by the weight of other people's expectations. But little by little, I began to see the fruits of my decision. I found new friends, people who didn't see me as a fixer or a problem solver. They just saw me, the real me. They didn't need me to sacrifice my happiness for them. Instead, we laughed, we shared experiences, and most importantly, they respected my boundaries. I also pursued things I had always put off. I started painting again, something I loved as a child but had abandoned in the chaos of family drama. I took up cooking classes, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. I traveled, exploring new places and meeting new people. But the most important change wasn't in what I was doing, but in how I felt about it. I had found a sense of freedom I never thought possible. Meanwhile, the family's attempts grew more desperate. They tried calling again, sending messages, and even showing up at my apartment unannounced. But by now, I was different. I no longer felt the urge to answer the phone or explain myself. It had become clear to me that the only thing they wanted was to put me back in my place, to restore the dynamic that had kept me as their emotional punching bag. And then one final message came through. It was my father, and this time there was no manipulation in his tone, no guilt-tripping, just regret. "I'm sorry, son," he said. "We were wrong. I was wrong. I didn't realize what I had until it was too late. I hope you can forgive us." But by the time I heard those words, it didn't matter anymore. I had already moved on. The person I had become, the life I had built, was far more valuable than any apology they could offer. I had learned the most important lesson of all. Love, especially family love, should never come with strings attached. I had set myself free, and in doing so, I had created a new life, one that was mine to live on my terms. Sometimes cutting off the toxic people in your life isn't just necessary, it's empowering. And for the first time, I truly understood that. And the campus buzzed with families rushing to celebrate their graduates. There I stood, diploma in hand, amidst a sea of faces, proud, hopeful, and eager for what the future held. This day was supposed to be about me, a culmination of years of late nights, endless assignments, and challenges I'd faced alone. But as I stepped into the rented hall where my family had gathered, the weight of my father's voice came crashing down. "And no one's coming to your party! Grow up!" he shouted, his words cutting through the room like a cold wind. I froze, the sting of the words reverberating in my chest. My hands, once filled with excitement, now trembled slightly as I clutched the edges of my graduation gown. I had expected some sort of congratulatory nod, A simple well done, maybe even a hug. But instead, my father's anger filled the space, making everything feel like a cruel joke. His face, red with frustration, told me everything I needed to know. This achievement meant nothing to him. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. For so long, I had hoped this day would be different, hoped that my family would finally see me for who I had become, not just the disappointment they had always labeled me. But now, standing in front of them, I realized something. No amount of achievement, no matter how hard-earned, would ever change their perception of me. "It's just a cheap degree," I managed to say, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion, though inside, everything was crumbling. I wasn't angry anymore, not with him. I was just done. My father didn't even flinch at my response. He waved me off, already turning back to the drinks table with my mother, as if my words had no weight, no meaning. And that's when the anger hit me, not the fiery, loud kind that he was so used to throwing at me, but a quiet, cold fury that sat heavy in my chest. I understood then. It wasn't about the degree. It wasn't about the party. It was about them, about how they had always seen me as lesser, how they had never believed in me. And in that moment, I decided that this day would be the turning point. I wasn't going to beg for their validation anymore. I wasn't going to let them dictate my life. As the party continued around me, filled with forced smiles and hollow congratulations from distant relatives, I slipped into the background. I didn't need to make a scene, didn't need to scream or fight back. No, I'd learned over the years that silence could be more powerful than any words. The time for begging for their approval was over. It was time to take control, and I would start by doing it in the quietest, most effective way I knew. The drive home from the party was a blur. The streets seemed to stretch out endlessly before me as I gripped the wheel, my thoughts spinning faster than the tires could turn. It wasn't the words my father had shouted that lingered. They'd been harsh, yes, but I was used to them. No, what lingered was the deep, gnawing ache of something I had finally accepted. My family wasn't just dysfunctional, they were toxic. For years, I had tried to fit into their mold, to become the person they wanted me to be, always striving to prove that I was worthy of their love. It was a cycle of constant disappointment, each attempt to make them proud falling short, leaving me hollow. But that day, as I watched them ignore me, I realized I had been seeking validation from the wrong people all along. I remembered the countless times I'd come home with a report card, hoping my father would at least acknowledge my hard work. His response was always the same. "You're not a doctor. You're not making enough money. Try harder." And then there was my mother, always quietly disappointed when I didn't meet her standards of perfection. She never said it outright, but her silence said it all. My mind flashed back to when I was a child, when I'd cried for the love I never got, when I'd stayed up late just to get a pat on the back for something I should have been naturally good at. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. And then there was my sister, lazy, entitled, always getting away with everything. I could never understand how she could do so little and yet receive so much. My parents always had an excuse for her. "She's young," they'd say, "she'll figure it out." But me? I was the one expected to be perfect, to do it all, to be the responsible one. I was the one who had to make the money, make the grade, and bear the emotional weight of a family that didn't care about me. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about one graduation day. It was about a lifetime of silently tolerating the abuse, the neglect, the constant undermining of everything I did. And I couldn't do it anymore. The person I had been, the person who had accepted all of this, was gone. The new person, the one who would finally take control, was just beginning to emerge. In that moment, something shifted. I had been living for everyone else for so long, always trying to gain their approval. But I realized that all along I had been forgetting one important thing. I needed to live for myself. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. And in the quiet of that car ride, with nothing but the hum of the engine and the vastness of the empty road before me, I made my decision. It was time to stop being the victim. It was time to take charge of my own life, and I knew just where to start. The morning after my graduation party, the weight of my decision felt both heavy and liberating. I sat at my kitchen table, the sunlight filtering through the blinds, casting long shadows over the room. The silence of the house was almost deafening. I had a choice now, either to continue living the way I always had, drowning in my family's expectations and emotional abuse, or to step away and reclaim the power I had given them over my life for so long. As I sat there, I let my thoughts settle. The path forward was clear. There would be no grand confrontation, no shouting match with my parents. That wasn't my style. I had grown beyond the need for their approval or their attention. No, the power was in the subtlety, in the quiet rebellion that would hurt them more than anything loud or obvious could. I didn't need to beg for their respect. I was going to take control of my life, silently, quietly, but decisively. I pulled up my bank account on my phone and navigated to the automatic payment settings. There, in black and white, was the $2,300 automatic rent payment I had been making every month for years. Rent for the house they lived in, the house that, for as long as I could remember, had been the symbol of my compliance to their every demand. This was the payment that kept them comfortable, that kept them from ever facing the consequences of their own irresponsibility. My father, who refused to acknowledge my accomplishments, would never know the quiet sacrifice I had made, the financial stability I had provided them in the background, just to keep them from blaming me for their own failures. Without a second thought, I pressed the button to cancel the payment. The confirmation screen flashed before me, and with it came an odd sense of relief. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the rent. It was about the principle, about taking back control of my life from two people who had never acknowledged my worth. I closed my phone and leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of the moment sink in. My parents had always taken so much from me, my time, my energy, my emotional well-being, but I had never asked for anything in return. I had silently supported them, always the responsible one, always the good child. I realized now that the only way to break free from the suffocating cycle was to cut the ties that bound me to them. But that was only the beginning. I wasn't going to stop there. A wave of clarity washed over me, and I knew what I had to do next. It would be swift, quiet, and irreversible. They wouldn't see it coming. I wasn't angry. No, anger had no place in this. This was about self-preservation. This was about me finally standing up for myself, without a single word of explanation. They had never cared to listen before, and they certainly wouldn't listen now. I stood up from the table, my decision made. I was going to take back everything that had once been mine, and I would do it without any dramatic speeches, no blame placed at their feet. I would simply make the choices that would ensure I could live the life I deserved, one free from the emotional burdens they had placed on me for far too long. I walked to the door, my keys in hand. The car, the one that I had put under my name to help them out when they needed it, was the next step. It was time to reclaim it. The first step in my silent rebellion had been taken. There was no turning back now. The drive to my parents' house felt longer than usual, each mile stretching out as I prepared myself for what was to come. The world outside the car window was a blur, my thoughts consumed with the quiet storm brewing inside me. The decision to cancel the rent payment had been liberating, but it was only the beginning. Now, I was about to take the car back, something that had always been a symbol of their comfort and my silent sacrifices. It wasn't about the car itself, but what it represented, my constant role as the responsible one, the one who always cleaned up the messes they made, the one who bore the weight of their expectations without a word of thanks. I pulled up in front of their house, the familiar place where I had spent so many years playing the dutiful child. My parents' house looked just the same as it always had, the garden neatly trimmed, the front door freshly painted. But today it felt like a prison to me, one I had built for myself out of years of misplaced loyalty and emotional exhaustion. As I sat there in the car, looking at the house, I felt an overwhelming sense of finality. This wasn't a decision I was making on a whim. This was a turning point, a moment that would mark the end of my self-imposed servitude. I turned off the engine, the silence inside the car almost deafening. I knew my parents would be inside, probably sitting in the living room, engrossed in their usual routine. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea that the child they had once known, always available, always obedient, was gone. It was hard to reconcile the person I had been with the person I was becoming, but there was no turning back now. I had to do this, not just for my own peace, but for my own survival. I took a deep breath before stepping out of the car, locking the door behind me. As I made my way to the front door, I felt an odd sense of calm. My heart didn't race. There was no anger, no frustration, just a quiet determination. I had been angry once, yes. But now I understood something that had eluded me for so long. Silence was the most powerful weapon I could wield. I didn't need to yell or demand anything. I didn't need to make a scene. I simply needed to take back control in the most dignified way possible. The door opened before I could knock. My mother stood there, looking at me with that familiar, disapproving look she often gave when I wasn't meeting her expectations. She was silent for a moment, her gaze flicking over me, as though trying to assess my mood. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice casual, but I could hear the edge of concern hidden beneath it. She wasn't used to me showing up unannounced, especially not after everything that had happened at the graduation party. "I'm here to take the car," I said, my voice calm, steady. The words fell from my lips with an almost eerie quietness, as if this moment was predestined, as if there was no other option left for me. Her eyes widened, the shock registering slowly on her face. "What do you mean, take the car?" she asked, her voice rising in confusion. "Why? We need it. You can't just take it." "I can," I replied, keeping my tone even. "It's mine. I've been paying for it, maintaining it, and making sure it runs. But you've been using it like it's a given. So today I'm taking it back. Consider it part of my graduation gift to myself." Her face fell. There was a flicker of panic, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile, one that had been perfected over years of pretending everything was fine. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, though I could see the hesitation in her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" I didn't respond immediately. I didn't need to. The truth hung heavy in the air between us. She knew why. She just didn't want to face it. But she would have to. And just like the rent payment, the car was only the beginning. I was done playing the role they had written for me. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of my father standing in the doorway of the living room, watching me with a blank expression. His eyes met mine for the briefest moment, and I could almost hear the unspoken question, "What are you doing?" But this time there was no answer, no explanation, no apology. I simply walked away, and for the first time in my life, it felt like I was walking towards something far better than anything they could ever offer. The days that followed were oddly peaceful. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The weight of my family's expectations no longer hung over me, and the space I had created for myself felt like a breath of fresh air. I had done what I needed to do to regain control, to assert my independence in a way that didn't involve begging for validation. And as much as I had expected some form of retaliation or drama from my parents, the silence that followed was almost eerie. The first few days after I took back the car and canceled the rent payment, I had expected some kind of confrontation. I had imagined my parents calling, shouting, demanding answers. But there was nothing, not a single word. I had always prided myself on my ability to read people, to sense when something was brewing beneath the surface. But this silence, it was different. It was a silence laced with fear. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, even though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. It wasn't until I received an unexpected letter that I began to understand the depth of the consequences of my actions. The letter came in the mail on a Thursday afternoon. It was from the bank, the same bank that had been handling my parents' mortgage for years. I opened it, and my heart sank as I read the first few lines. "Dear, my name. We are writing to inform you that we have recently noticed a discrepancy in your account records. Specifically, a large sum of money has been withdrawn from your account to cover the outstanding balance on your parents' mortgage." I read the letter over and over, my mind racing. The bank had sent the payment for my parents' mortgage in my name without my permission. The amount, over $500,000, was a sum I never authorized. My name had been attached to their loan without my knowledge, without my consent, and now I was being held responsible for the payments. I had never signed any paperwork. I had never agreed to this. Yet here I was, tied to a mortgage I didn't even know existed. My heart began to race as I reread the letter again, scanning the fine print. There it was, my signature, or rather, someone had forged my signature on the loan documents, attaching me as a cosigner. I didn't know how or when it had happened, but I knew one thing for sure. My parents had done this to me. They had quietly added my name to their debts, to their financial irresponsibility, without ever telling me. They had used me as collateral for their mistakes, all while pretending like everything was fine. They knew I would pick up the pieces. I had always done so, silently and without question. But not anymore. I stood up from the table, the letters still clutched in my hand. My anger wasn't fiery, but cold, simmering beneath the surface. I could feel the familiar sting of betrayal, but this time, it wasn't the type that left me crying in silence. This time it fueled something deeper within me, a quiet rage, a resolve to take control in the only way that would matter. I spent the rest of the day figuring out my next move. The bank had given me an ultimatum, pay up or face legal action. But I wasn't going to cave in. I wasn't going to let them use me as a scapegoat for their financial recklessness. The decision to remove myself from their financial lives had already been made. But now I needed to take it one step further. The following day, I called my lawyer. I needed someone to help me navigate the mess my parents had created. I had to untangle myself from their debts, from the years of manipulation and control they had exerted over me. I couldn't let them win, not this time. As I sat in the lawyer's office later that week, I began to feel a sense of calm wash over me. The lawyer assured me that the situation could be resolved, but it would take time. It wouldn't be easy, but I was prepared. I had learned long ago that silence was powerful. Now, I would let my actions speak louder than any words could. But in the back of my mind, I knew this was only the beginning. The real battle wouldn't come from the bank. It would come from my parents. And when the truth finally sank in for them, that I wasn't going to be their fallback anymore, they would face the consequences of their actions. The days after I took back the car and canceled the rent payments were eerily quiet, a kind of calm before the storm I knew was coming. I kept my distance from my parents, letting them simmer in the consequences of their actions. There was no immediate response, no angry calls or frantic texts. It was almost like they were waiting for me to cave in, to beg for forgiveness. But this time, I wasn't going to do that. Then it happened. 5 days after my final act of defiance, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice, shaky and distant, came through the line. "Are you coming by today?" she asked, as if nothing had changed. "No," I replied flatly. "I'm not coming by today." Her voice faltered. "We need to talk about this. Your father is upset. You're making things harder than they need to be." Harder? For whom? For them, maybe. But not for me. I had carried their weight for far too long. I wasn't going to shoulder their burdens any longer. "No, Mom," I said, my tone steady. "I think you've been making things hard for me for years. I've done everything for you, and this is how you repay me? You put me on a loan I didn't even know about. You've used my name, my trust, and now I'm stuck with your debt." There was a pause, a long, painful silence. Then her voice cracked. "You don't understand. We did this because we love you. We thought it would help you." The anger that had been simmering within me finally broke through. "Help me? By chaining me to your mess? By making me responsible for everything you failed at? I didn't ask for your help. I never did." Another long pause. I could almost hear the weight of her regret, but I felt nothing. "I'm done," I added, my voice calm but resolute. "You don't get to manipulate me anymore." I hung up without another word. The phone felt heavy in my hand, but the peace that followed was undeniable. I had finally done it. I had taken back control, and nothing was going to make me regret it. The days after my conversation with my mother felt strange, almost like I was floating in a space between the past and the future. The anger, the betrayal, it was all still there, simmering beneath the surface. But there was something else too, a sense of clarity. I had taken a stand. I had walked away from the cycle that had kept me chained to their mistakes for so long. And as the days passed, I began to feel a shift inside me. It was as if the weight of their expectations had been lifted, even though I knew the hardest part was still coming. I didn't expect them to just let things go. They never did before, and I wasn't about to fool myself into thinking this time would be different. I knew that eventually they'd come knocking, and when they did, I would be ready. The call came on a Friday afternoon, 2 days after I had canceled everything. My father's voice was cold, more controlled than I had ever heard it before. "You need to fix this," he said, his words clipped. "Your mother is beside herself. We've had enough of your childish behavior." I could feel the familiar sting of guilt creeping in, but I pushed it aside. This wasn't about me being childish. This was about standing up for myself, something I had never been allowed to do before. You should have thought of that before you dragged me into your mess, I said, my voice steady. You don't get to make decisions for me anymore. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, the tension almost palpable. You're ruining everything, my father finally muttered, his voice low and tinged with anger. We've always been a family. What kind of person are you to just walk away like this? I felt a sense of calm wash over me, despite the guilt that threatened to rise. The kind of person who has had enough, I said quietly. I'm not going to carry your burdens anymore. I'm done. The line went silent again, and for the first time I realized something. They weren't going to change. No amount of guilt, no amount of manipulation would ever make them see me as an individual with my own needs and desires. I wasn't going to beg them for approval anymore. I had already made my choice, and now I had to live with it. And so I did. Weeks passed in a strange, unsettling peace. There was no immediate fallout from my decision to cut ties, no frantic calls or messages pleading for my return. My parents, I realized, were waiting for me to break. They thought I would eventually regret my actions, feel the weight of my choices, and beg for their forgiveness. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't going back, not this time. I wasn't going to apologize for standing up for myself, even if it meant losing everything I had known. I went about my days with a new sense of autonomy, living my life the way I wanted, free from the chains they had bound me with for so long. It wasn't easy, but I felt stronger than I had ever felt. I no longer depended on their approval, no longer needed their validation. I had learned to trust myself, to find peace in my own decisions, and for once I felt truly free. Then, one Saturday afternoon, I came home to find their car parked outside my house. My heart sank, but I didn't feel the familiar rush of panic. I knew this moment was inevitable. They had come, not to apologize, but to make me feel guilty, to pull me back into their world of manipulation and control. But I was ready for them. I opened the door, and there they were, my father rigid with anger and my mother, her face pale and tear-streaked. We need to talk, my father said, his voice colder than usual. I'm listening, I replied, standing firm. I wasn't going to make this easy for them. We don't understand, my mother began, her voice faltering. Why did you do this? We thought we were helping you. We thought you needed us. No, I said, cutting her off. You didn't think about what I needed. You never asked. You used me and I allowed it. But not anymore. Silence hung in the air, and for the first time I saw something different in their eyes, regret. It wasn't enough, though. They couldn't undo the past, and neither could I. I'm sorry, my mother whispered, but it was too late. I know, I said quietly, closing the door behind them. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free.